The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Rockies, painting the horizon in fiery streaks of red and gold. Captain Marcus Steele O'Connor sat atop a crumbling outcrop, binoculars in hand, scanning the valley below. The silence was unnatural, broken only by the occasional hum of alien patrol drones that swept the area with cold precision. Earth wasn't Earth anymore. The Xantraxian invasion had changed everything. Behind him, a faint metallic clang echoed through the ravine where the rest of his team worked. Steele turned to see Sergeant Leroy Chains, Washington, securing a makeshift perimeter. Chains, a towering figure with arms like steel cables, nodded as their eyes met. His casual demeanor masked the grim determination shared by all of them. They were survivors, but more than that, they were fighters. "Anything out there?" Chains asked, hoisting his M240 machine gun onto his shoulder. "Not yet," Steele replied, handing over the binoculars. "But they're close. They always are." Down below, Lieutenant Diego Martinez emerged from the shadow of an old military hangar, his face streaked with grease. He waved a spanner in triumph. "Captain, you won't believe this. We've got ourselves a treasure trove." Steele descended to join him, stepping carefully over debris. The hangar was a relic from another era, its walls scarred with bullet holes and scorch marks. Inside, Corporal Alan Techie Harris was crouched over an alien drone, its sleek body partially dismantled. A dozen human and alien components lay scattered on the ground, illuminated by the flickering light of a portable lamp. "What kind of treasure?" Steele asked, raising an eyebrow. Martinez grinned, gesturing toward the far end of the hangar. There, under a tattered tarp, was an M1 Abrams tank. Its once pristine armor was scratched and rusted in places, but it stood like a sleeping giant. "She's a beast, Captain," Martinez said, his voice filled with reverence. "Not fully operational, but give me a couple of days and a decent power source, and we'll have her roaring." Steele ran a hand over the tank's surface, feeling the cold, hard metal beneath his palm. The Abrams was a relic, outdated by even Earth's pre-invasion standards, but it was solid, reliable. And in this war, it might just be what they needed. "Doesn't matter how old it is," Chains said, leaning against the tank. "This thing's built to fight. Hell, it's probably tougher than anything the Xantraxians have thrown at us." "Don't get cocky," Steele said, though he couldn't help but share the flicker of hope in Chains' voice. He turned to Harris. "What about that drone? Can we use it?" Harris adjusted his glasses, his fingers deftly reconnecting a series of wires. "I'm working on it. Their tech's alien, obviously, but not impossible to figure out. If I can get its power core stable, we might be able to retrofit the Abrams with some of their shielding tech, or at least boost its systems." "Make it quick," Steele ordered. "We're on borrowed time here." As if on cue, a distant hum grew louder. Steele stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Martinez and Chains followed suit, their movements quick but deliberate. Harris scrambled to kill the light, plunging the hangar into darkness. The hum crescendoed into a mechanical whine as a trio of Xantraxian drones swept over the valley. Their sleek, insect-like forms glinted in the dying light, their searchlights piercing the shadows. Steele motioned for the team to hold their positions. One of the drones hovered near the hangar entrance, its light spilling inside. Steele's heart pounded as the beam inched closer to their hiding spot. For a moment, he thought he saw the glint of its optical sensor locking onto them. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the drone veered away, joining its counterparts in the distance. The hum faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Chains exhaled loudly, muttering a string of curses under his breath. Martinez wiped his brow, his face pale but determined. "They're hunting," Steele said grimly. "They know we're here. We need to move fast." "What's the plan, Captain?" Chains asked, his voice steady despite the tension. Steele looked at the tank, its imposing silhouette a stark contrast to the fragile remnants of humanity around it. "We make her operational. Martinez, you focus on repairs. Harris, see if you can integrate anything useful from the drone. Chains, you're on perimeter duty. Keep those bastards off our backs." "And you?" Martinez asked, I'll figure out where to hit them, Steele said. If we're going to fight back, we need to make it count. The team nodded, their trust in him unspoken but absolute. They had all lost something to the invasion, families, friends, their old lives. But together, they were a force to be reckoned with. As the night deepened, the hangar became a hive of activity. Sparks flew as Martinez worked tirelessly to revive the Abrams, his curses punctuating the steady rhythm of his tools. Harris murmured to himself as he deciphered the drone systems, occasionally letting out a triumphant whoop when something clicked. Chains patrolled the perimeter, his keen eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Steele stayed at the center of it all, planning, coordinating, and always watching. He knew the odds were stacked against them. The Xantraxians had superior technology, overwhelming numbers, and no mercy. But humanity had something they didn't, an unyielding spirit and the ability to adapt. By dawn, progress had been made. The Abrams roared to life, its engine coughing at first, but quickly settling into a deep, resonant growl. Martinez emerged from the driver's seat, grease-streaked but grinning. "She's alive, Captain," he said. "Not at full strength, but she'll fight." Steele allowed himself a rare smile. "Good, because we're going to need her." The hum of approaching drones cut through the morning air, shattering the moment of triumph. Steele's smile faded as he grabbed his rifle. "Here they come," he said. "Let's see what this old girl can do." The team sprang into action, each man taking his position. As the first drone appeared over the ridge, the Abrams turret swiveled, its barrel locking onto the target. Steele's voice was calm but commanding as he gave the order. "Fire!" The tank roared, its cannon unleashing a deafening blast that echoed through the valley. The kinetic round struck the drone head-on, shattering its energy shield and tearing it apart in a fiery explosion. The remaining drones hesitated, as if processing this unexpected turn of events. Steele didn't give them the chance to recover. "Reload and fire again," he barked. The second shot hit its mark, sending another drone spiraling to the ground. The third fled, its retreat a stark contrast to the arrogance the Xantraxians had displayed since the invasion began. As the smoke cleared, Steele looked at his team, their faces lit with a mix of relief and determination. They had won a small victory, but the war was far from over. "Let's get moving," Steele said, his voice firm. "This is just the beginning." And with that, they began their march toward the next battle, their spirits bolstered by the knowledge that humanity still had a fighting chance. The Abrams rumbled forward, its repaired engine a low, guttural growl that resonated through the canyon. Captain Marcus Steele O'Connor rode in the commander's seat, scanning the narrow terrain ahead through the periscope. The tank was functional now, thanks to Lieutenant Diego Martinez's relentless efforts, but its systems were far from perfect. The Abrams wasn't just a machine. It was their lifeline in a war that humanity had already lost too many times. Inside the tank, Corporal Alan Techie Harris hunched over a laptop rigged to the alien drone's core. Sparks occasionally jumped from the crude connections he'd made between human hardware and Xantraxian technology. His muttering filled the cramped space as he worked. "This is insanity," Harris said, not for the first time. "Their tech runs on principles we barely understand. One wrong move, and this thing could fry us all." Steele's voice cut through the tension. "And if we do nothing, they'll kill us anyway. Keep at it." Harris sighed but didn't stop. Beside him, Sergeant Leroy Chains Washington leaned against the hull, methodically checking his ammunition. His calm, deliberate movements were a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the others. Martinez, seated at the driver's controls, adjusted his headset. "You're forgetting the beauty of it, Harris. They think we're too primitive to understand their tech, which is why we're going to shove it right back down their throats." Harris snorted. "Beautiful isn't the word I'd use." Steele glanced at the holographic map projected on the console. The alien base they'd targeted wasn't far now, but every mile brought new risks. Drones patrolled the skies, and alien ground forces moved with an efficiency that made traditional guerrilla tactics seem laughable. They had one advantage, though: the element of surprise. The Xantraxians didn't expect resistance, let alone a centuries-old tank modified with their own stolen technology. That arrogance might just be their undoing. A sharp beep from Harris's console broke the uneasy quiet. He sat up straighter, his expression shifting from frustration to excitement. "Captain, I think I've got it," he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I managed to isolate the drone's power modulation systems. If I can sync it with the Abrams, we might be able to jury-rig a temporary energy shield." Steele's eyes narrowed. "How temporary?" "Minutes, maybe seconds. It'll depend on how much stress it's under, but it's better than nothing." Martinez slapped the side of the tank with a grin. "Hell yeah, an Abrams with a shield? That'll give those aliens a real surprise." Chains wasn't smiling. "And if it doesn't work, what happens then?" Harris hesitated, but Steele answered for him. "Then we do what humans have always done. We adapt, we fight, and we survive. Now, Harris, get that shield online." The corporal nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he finalized the connections. A faint hum filled the cabin, and a shimmering blue field flickered to life around the tank. It wavered, unstable, but it was there. "Shield's operational," Harris said, his voice tinged with both pride and apprehension. "But don't push it too hard. It's held together with duct tape and prayers." "Noted," Steele said, his focus shifting back to the mission. "Martinez, keep us moving. Chains, get ready for contact. Harris, stay on that shield. We're going in hot." The tank surged forward, its treads crunching over rocky terrain. The canyon walls narrowed, forcing them into single file, but it also provided cover from aerial patrols. Steele's fingers tightened on the hatch as he braced for the inevitable. They didn't have to wait long. A high-pitched screech echoed through the canyon, followed by the whine of approaching drones. Steele's voice was steady as he barked orders. "Chains, light them up." The gunner's hatch opened, and Chains leaned out, his machine gun roaring to life. Bright tracers cut through the air, forcing the drones to scatter. One exploded in a fiery ball as a round found its mark, but the others pressed their attack, firing bursts of plasma at the Abrams. Harris shouted from his station, "Shields are holding, but they won't last long." Steele didn't hesitate. "Martinez, take us into the side passage. We'll use the canyon walls to funnel them." The tank swerved sharply, its treads throwing up dust and debris. The maneuver forced the drones to follow in a tighter formation, making them easier targets. Chains didn't waste the opportunity, his machine gun shredding another drone. Just as the last drone spiraled into the ground, a new threat emerged. A squad of Xantraxian infantry appeared on the ridge above, their sleek weapons trained on the tank. Plasma bolts rained down, their energy hammering against the shield. "Shields at critical," Harris shouted. "Martinez, get us under cover." Steele ordered. The tank lurched forward, crashing into the shadow of an overhang as the shield finally gave out. Blue sparks cascaded around them, and the air inside the tank grew tense. Chains ducked back inside, reloading his weapon. "That was too close." "We're not done yet," Steele said. He checked the map again. The alien base was just beyond the next ridge. "Martinez, take us up. Slow and steady." The tank climbed the incline, its engine straining. As they crested the ridge, the alien base came into view. It was a sprawling, angular structure that glowed with an eerie green light. Dozens of Xantraxians patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and mechanical. Steele studied the scene, his mind racing. The base's power core was exposed, a pulsating orb of energy at the center. If they could hit it, they could cripple the entire outpost. But the base was heavily fortified, and they only had one shot. "Harris, can we rig the shield to overload?" Steele asked, an idea forming. Harris blinked, caught off guard. "Overload? You mean turn it into a weapon?" "Exactly," Steele said. "Channel all the energy into one burst. We'll drive straight into the base and detonate it at the core." Martinez let out a low whistle. "That's one hell of a gamble." "It's our best shot," Steele said. "Get it done." Harris worked quickly, sweat dripping from his brow as he rewired the shield generator. Chains readied the machine gun, his jaw set. Martinez kept his hand steady on the controls, his expression grim but determined. "Overload sequence is set," Harris said after a tense moment. But once it goes, we're done. No shields, no tank. Steele nodded. Then we make it count. He gave the order, and the Abrams roared down the slope, heading straight for the alien base. Plasma fire rained down on them, but the tank pressed forward, its armor deflecting most of the shots. As they reached the perimeter, Chains unleashed a barrage of gunfire, cutting down Zantraxians in their path. Martinez drove with precision, weaving between obstacles as they closed in on the power core. "Now, Harris!" Steele shouted. Harris hit the switch, and the shield flared to life one last time. The energy surged outward in a blinding explosion, engulfing the power core and the surrounding area. The shockwave rocked the tank, and everything went white. When the dust settled, the base was in ruins. The team emerged from the battered tank, their bodies aching but alive. Steele looked at the devastation they had caused, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, his voice resolute. "But it's a start." The smoldering remains of the alien base stretched out before them, a chaotic mix of twisted metal and scorched earth. The once imposing structure was now a graveyard of Zantraxian technology, its pulsating green lights extinguished. Captain Marcus Steele O'Connor stood atop the battered M1 Abrams, scanning the horizon for any sign of reinforcements. The wind carried the acrid scent of burning fuel, a stark reminder of their narrow victory. "Still clear, Captain," Sergeant Leroy Chains, Washington called from a nearby ridge, his rifle slung across his back. He squinted into the distance, ever vigilant. "But it won't stay that way for long. They'll send someone to check on their outpost." Steele nodded. "Then we don't have much time." He turned to Lieutenant Diego Martinez, who was inspecting the tank's tracks with a grim expression. "How bad is it?" Steele asked. Martinez wiped a streak of oil from his face. "She's barely holding together, Captain. The blast fried most of the electronics, and the suspension's shot. We'll be lucky if we can get her moving again." Steele's jaw tightened. The Abrams had been their trump card, their shield against an enemy that considered them little more than vermin. Without it, they were vulnerable. Corporal Alan "Techie" Harris climbed out of the tank, his hands blackened from hours of tinkering. "The core overload did more damage than I expected," he admitted. "Whatever systems we salvaged from the drones are toast. If we want this thing operational again, we'll need parts, and not the kind you can just scavenge from Earth." Steele's gaze drifted back to the wreckage of the alien base. Somewhere in that debris, there had to be something they could use. A weapon, a power source, anything to give them a fighting chance. "Chains," Steele called, his voice firm. "Take Harris and start combing through the wreckage. Focus on anything that looks like it could power the Abrams or upgrade our gear. Martinez, keep working on the tank. I don't care if you have to duct tape it back together. Make it move." "And what about you?" Chains asked, slinging his rifle across his chest. "I'm going to set up a perimeter," Steele replied. "If the Zantraxians come, I want to know before they're breathing down our necks." The team moved with practiced efficiency, each man falling into his role without hesitation. Chains and Harris began their search, picking through the rubble with a mix of caution and urgency. Martinez disappeared beneath the Abrams, the clanging of tools echoing through the desolate landscape. Steele climbed to higher ground, his binoculars scanning the valley. His mind raced, calculating their odds. The Zantraxians were too advanced, too numerous. Humanity's resistance was scattered, their resources dwindling. But as long as they could fight, there was hope. "Captain!" Harris's shout broke through Steele's thoughts. Steele slid down the ridge, reaching Harris and Chains near what appeared to be the remains of a command console. Harris held up a small, cube-like device, its surface etched with glowing blue lines. "What is it?" Steele asked, studying the object. "It's some kind of portable power core," Harris explained, his excitement barely contained. "Smaller than what the drones use, but it might be enough to give the Abrams a second wind, or at least power its main systems." Chains crossed his arms. "That's great. But how do we know it won't blow us sky high the moment we plug it in?" "We don't," Harris admitted. "But I can rig a stabilizer to minimize the risk. It's not perfect, but it's the best shot we've got." Steele weighed the options. The risk was high, But so was the reward. Without power, the Abrams was dead weight. With it, they had a chance to strike again, and maybe inspire others to join the fight. "Do it," Steele said finally. "But be quick. We don't have much time." Harris nodded, already sketching out a plan in the dirt. Chains kept watch as Harris worked, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Back at the tank, Martinez had managed to jury-rig the suspension enough to make it functional, though it groaned with every adjustment. When Harris returned with the power core, the team worked together to integrate it into the Abrams damage systems. Sparks flew, and the smell of ozone filled the air. But after an hour of tense silence, the engine roared to life. Martinez leaned back, a triumphant grin on his face. "She's alive!" Again. The celebration was short-lived. A low, resonant hum echoed through the valley, growing louder with each passing second. Steele's heart sank. "Drones," Chains said, his tone grim. Steele grabbed his rifle and climbed onto the tank. In the distance, a swarm of Xantraxian drones was approaching, their sleek forms cutting through the sky like razor blades. At their center was something new, a larger, more heavily armed variant, its energy cannons glowing ominously. "They brought reinforcements," Martinez muttered, his voice laced with dread. Steele's mind raced. The Abrams was operational, but barely. They had no shields, limited ammunition, and no time to run. "We fight," Steele said, his voice steady. "We've made it this far. We don't back down now." Chains climbed into the gunner's seat, his hand steady as he calibrated the turret. Harris and Martinez scrambled to prepare the tank for combat, their movements swift but controlled. The first wave of drones descended, their weapons lighting up the battlefield. Chains opened fire, the Abrams cannon unleashing deafening blasts that shattered the enemy formation. One drone exploded, then another, but the larger variant pressed forward, its energy cannons charging. "Harris, can we boost the core output?" Steele shouted over the chaos. "Only if you want to melt the whole tank." Harris yelled back. "Do it," Steele ordered. Harris hesitated for only a second before redirecting power from the auxiliary systems. The Abrams surged with renewed strength, its turrets swiveling faster, its shots hitting harder. Chains aimed at the larger drone, unleashing a barrage of fire that cracked its shields. The enemy's cannon fired, a beam of searing energy that struck the Abrams' side. The tank rocked violently, but it held. Martinez cursed as he fought to keep it steady. "Take the shot," Steele barked. Chains lined up the cannon and fired. The shell struck the larger drone dead center, its shields collapsing in a brilliant burst of light. The drone wavered, its systems failing, before crashing into the ground in a fiery explosion. The remaining drones scattered, their formation broken. For the first time, the Xantraxians retreated. As the battlefield fell silent, Steele climbed down from the tank, his legs shaking from adrenaline. The team gathered around him, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "We did it," Martinez said, disbelief in his voice. Steele looked at the wreckage, then at his team. "This isn't just about us. Word will spread. People will know that the Xantraxians can be beaten." Chains nodded. "And when they come back, we'll be ready." Steele allowed himself a small smile. They had survived another day, but the fight was far from over. And as long as they could fight, humanity still had hope.